welcome to bringing Jesus back into focus. I'm Christopher John Joseph. I was a follower of Jesus since 1957 when I was born into the earth world, and I was in the Jewish Christian Catholic Church, but I left when I was 16 or 17, and I took Jesus and his words with me because I did not believe that Yahweh, the two-headed God of the Jews, was the same divine source of love and non-violence that Jesus was at one with in the heavenly spiritual world. And the only way to come to the heavenly spiritual world is through the way of love and non-violence that Jesus taught. So I left, and then I studied Buddhist teachings, who was also a pacifist, as Jesus originally was. They weren't even teaching that we have to be pacifists. They weren't even teaching that. So I'm very disheartened by the way they've poisoned his teachings, but it was done 1700 years ago during the 4th century, during the Emperor Constantine reign of Rome, when he went to war in the name of Jesus and the divine loving spiritual creator and murdered and killed his rival's army so he could become leader of Rome, etc., and the emperor. And he said, well, Jesus and the God of Jesus helped me win the battle and kill with the sword. So, of course, the Christian leaders caved in. Within about 50 years, all Christians could join the army and go and kill and murder and yet still be followers of Jesus. So there's where the poison of the Jewish religion came in. They eventually converted everyone from being only Christian and only at one with the true loving spiritual creator of the heavenly spiritual world of love. They converted them back into being Jewish and Christian, and then they adopted the Yahweh two-headed God that Jesus was trying to lead the Jews away from. They brought that back into the Christian religion and got the Christians to worship the two-headed Yahweh God again. But they had Jesus there as well, but Jesus is only the spiritual child of the loving creator. So it was very mixed up. They put the new wine in with the old wine, and now we've got all this confusion. And children just don't bother going to these Jewish Christian churches anymore, and a lot of people I've known have left because of the Jewish religion poisoning the Christian religion, which it does, and so I've had to write about it. And these are the Gospels of Jesus Unplugged, because I love his words and I love his way. And he and Buddha both were pacifists, and so am I. So I belong to the original Christian church in the world, the original Christian community. And I'm not changing. Rip out the book of Revelation and burn it, because that's a slanderous book a slanderous book that was placed in the Gospels by an apocalyptic Jew who wants to assassinate the identity of Jesus and the loving creator and make you worship Yahweh again. So rip that book out, because that's a stinking, filthy lie. Now this is the book of the Gospels Unplugged, which will give you a much more realistic and clearer and true and correct understanding of the way of Jesus of love and non-violence, and who our loving spiritual creator really is of love. So this is the book, March the 11th. It should be out 2026. Jesus taught we can all experience an inner spiritual awakening if we search for it. He called this the treasure hidden in the field of earth or flesh. This is our eternal spiritual identity, empowered only by the loving spiritual life force of our loving spiritual creator. Our bodies of flesh are only temporary and empowered by earthly things, and all flesh dies. Only our spiritual body and soul mind of love lives on, to come into the presence of our loving creator, to reap as we have sown. His teachings and spiritual way of love and non-violence can help awaken us all into a new spiritual life here on earth, leading us to the heavenly spiritual world of love after death. Jesus taught we all have two different bodies with us in one, and he said that the spiritual body, being eternal, is the most important to be healthy and well in spirit. He provides us with the spiritual instructions to follow and become at one with, to be awakened and transformed into spiritual children of light of our loving spiritual creator in heaven. We then help awaken other children to become spiritual and bring peace and heavenly love to earth for all in need. These translations of the Gospels of Jesus remove the Jewish overlays and distortions placed over the universal teachings of Jesus and the spiritual way of non-violence and love. Our mortal minds change from being dualistic into singular minds, viewing all things through the eye of love. Jesus said, if your eye is single, you will be filled with light, but if dualistic and divided, you will be filled with darkness. Jesus said not to mix his new spiritual way of understanding our loving creator with the Old Testament dualistic God of the Jews, or you will lose the understanding of the one true loving spiritual creator of our spiritual lives, and not realize who you really are as her spiritual children of only love on earth. These Gospels help focus his message of the loving way to reach the heavenly spiritual world from earth. And I certainly hope they help clarify things for children who have left the Jewish Christian churches, quite understandably. And I'm trying to help them stay with Jesus and be transformed by his words. And you will be in heaven after your physical body dies. Heaven does exist, but hell exists too, but it's of your own making. That's another matter. So we'll get into this chapter 3 now. Jesus taught we all have two bodies, and that is absolutely what he taught. Body of flesh and a body of spirit. The body of flesh does not rise again from the dirt. Jesus says so. Feed it to the vultures. So we'll have a read of what he says, and we'll try to correct some of these distortions and perversions that all the Jewish Christian churches are teaching children, which is wrong. They shouldn't do it. The following is one of the most important, overlooked and misunderstood teachings of Jesus, where he literally states we all have two very different bodies with us right now that will separate at the time of death. One is an eternal spiritual body empowered only by our loving Creator's spiritual life force, and the other is a temporary earthly body empowered by earthly foods, water, chemicals, minerals and gases that dies, disintegrates and returns to the earth from which it was formed. Our spiritual body and soul leave our body of flesh at the time of death and return to be in the presence of our loving spiritual Creator to reap as we have sown. It's quite sensible to think your spirit will go to the source of your spiritual creation, which is a spiritual Creator. Your body of flesh and bones and blood and minerals and water and gases, where's that going to go? To the earth, the material world that formed it. Two in a single bed. This is the saying of Jesus, which amazingly is in the Gospels, but I must point out to you, my Gospel translation is correct. It's been perverted. In Matthew in particular, Matthew often perverts Jesus' sayings, and he puts in apocalyptic overlays. He cut and pastes things, or somebody else has done it to Matthew's Gospel. Some apocalyptic Jew has poisoned Matthew's Gospel, because the apocalyptic overlays in Matthew are massive, and yet he's got the description of the divine loving Creator as just only being love, who loves the good and the evil. So there's something wrong in Matthew. There's two different parallel lines going on there. One is dark and evil, and one is the love and light that Jesus brought in. So whether the author Matthew did it or someone's overwritten Matthew, we're not certain. But either he's done it or someone's done it. But this saying this is the correct way it should be structured. If you look at the traditional Jewish Christian Bibles, New Testaments, you'll see Matthew's distorted, and Luke does too. They have Jesus suddenly making this ramble about it coming back on the clouds. That's not there. That's false. Someone put that in. This is the correct saying. Two in a single bed. Luke 17:33-37. Jesus taught, he who lives an earthly life of only the flesh will lose it. But he who separates himself out from his life of flesh by following my spiritual way and teachings will find his eternal spiritual life. There will be two bodies in a single bed. One is spiritual and one is flesh. The one of spirit will be taken to be near to our loving spiritual Creator. The one of flesh will no longer be of any use, and being redundant will be sent forth. There will be two women grinding at a millstone in the same position. One is spiritual, one is flesh. The one of spirit will be taken to be near to our loving spiritual Creator. The one of flesh will no longer be of any use, and being redundant will be sent forth. There will be two standing in a field. One is spiritual, one is flesh. The one of spirit will be taken to be near to our loving spiritual Creator. The one of flesh will no longer be of any use, and being redundant will be sent forth. The disciples then asked Jesus, where will they be, Lord? Jesus replied, the dead body of flesh will be where the vultures gather. The other answer's been cut out. So I've put in what I believe Jesus may have said. This next saying has been deliberately cut out. The body of the Spirit will be where the eagles fly. Or he may have said, the body of the Spirit will be with our loving spiritual Creator in heaven, if we are ready. They've cut out the other answer, quite deliberately. They don't want people realizing this is the real truth of what Jesus was teaching. There's no apocalypse. He's not coming on the clouds. Your body doesn't rise up from the dirt again at some apocalyptic time. You're really being misled there very badly. Jesus says here very clearly, there are two women grinding at a millstone in the same position. There are two in a single bed. The Greek words are very specific. You have to understand that when women ground their grain to make flour, to make bread, women in the kitchen had their own little millstone, and only one woman could grind on that at a time. Two women couldn't grind on a little millstone. Impossible. But Jesus is saying there are two women there. And the Greek translation is very specific. There are two people in one bed, in a single bed. Two bodies. We'll go on to the Thomas, where it's much more stark and truthful. And that's why they wanted to destroy the Gospel of Thomas, so they could steer it towards this rising your flesh from the dead stuff. That's a Nicene Creed stuff. Thomas 61, Jesus said, two will relax on a couch. One will die. One will live. If the flesh has come into being because of the Spirit, it is a wonder. However, if Spirit came into being because of the flesh, this is a wonder of wonders. But I'm amazed at this, how such great richness of Spirit could be placed in such poverty of the flesh. When you know your true selves, then you will be known and understand that you are spiritual children of the loving Creator. But if you do not know your spiritual self, then you live in poverty, and your flesh will embody that poverty. Beautiful. We've got two bodies, Jesus is saying. Author, these very important teachings of Jesus can also be seen in one of his most simple and profound sayings. It is the Spirit who gives life. The flesh profits nothing. He is saying we all have two bodies in one that separate at death. Jesus wants us to awaken into our true eternal spiritual body of light and love as he did, and become at one with it while still in our temporary body of flesh. If we do not attain this, he says we will only live in the poverty of our flesh body. Only our spiritual body lives on to reap as we have sown. We must be filled with and live out of the loving spiritual life force from our loving Creator right now that empowers our spiritual life and our spiritual body. Our dead flesh is just food for the vultures and does not come back to life, as most Jewish Christians wrongly teach. They also distort this very important truth that Jesus gave us by saying there are two completely different people in the single bed, or at the millstone, or in the field, or on the couch. They are perverting this wonderful truth of Jesus and must stop teaching that to children. The Gospels have been tampered with, and the saying of Jesus about our body of spirit leaving at death to be with our loving spiritual Creator in heaven has been deliberately removed. This was to accommodate the Nicene agenda, falsely teaching that the dead body of Jesus came back to life, when in fact he left his dead body of flesh at death in his perfect spiritual body of light, which we all have within us, just as Jesus did. Two bodies in one. This is the core of his teachings. You don't need that other gobbledygook about flesh coming up at the apocalypse. You have to be spiritually alive right now, today, because you don't know the hour of the day of your death. And so you have to be ready to go in your spiritual body. That's what Jesus is saying over and over and over. And it's only empowered by a loving spiritual life force of love, and your spiritual mind is singular, not dualistic. It only sees everything through the eye of love. Our physical body and brain mind is dualistic. It's a bit dangerous. We have to be careful. The two bodies analogies I use are we're like a spiritual rider on an earthly horse. You've got to hold on to the reins of your horse, and you express the love of heaven through your horse. I manifest spiritual love in my spiritual mind and body through my physical body while I've got it. I bring love to children through my physical body. If someone falls over on the street and knocks their head on the concrete and I see it, I can choose to go and help them or not. My spiritual body, my spiritual mind, my true identity immediately goes over to help that child. Immediately. Total stranger, different race, different religion, irrelevant. They're a human child who's hurt. I go. A person in the dualistic mind of the body of flesh, which has become egotistical or false identity, might go, I don't know that person, I don't have to help them. Or they're a different race, or they're a different religion, I don't have to help them. That's when you've moved into this false shadow identity. It doesn't really exist. It's based on the flesh and the brain, which all disintegrates. You have to move into your spiritual identity, Jesus says, and be at love with everyone in every way you can, in whatever way they need love. Some need gentle, kind love. Some need strong words. Stop going to war and killing those children. Stop it. You're satanic. That's loving them. We're loving them by telling them they're satanic children. All the wars going on at the moment. You're all children of Satan. You're going to hell. We're loving them by telling them that. We're warning them. That's love. You're going to hell. Stop it. Turn around. Go back. As Jesus would say. Make the inner like the outer. Thomas 22. Jesus saw some babies being nursed and said to his disciples, these nursing babies are like those who enter the heavenly spiritual world. The disciples said to him, then shall we enter the heavenly world as babies? Jesus said to them, when you make the two into one, when you make the inner like the outer and the outer like the inner, and the upper like the lower, when you make male and female into a single one, so that the male will not be male and the female will not be female, when you make eyes replacing an eye, a hand replacing a hand, a foot replacing a foot, and an image replacing an image, then you will enter the heavenly spiritual world. The two become one. Think of this saying of Jesus like water in a vase. When the beautiful loving life force of the water in the vase, which is a different substance, clay vase, liquid water, when that liquid water flows into the vase, you might say, it infuses itself into the clay vase, then the vase and the water become at one at purpose in love. Your physical body has to become at one at purpose with your spiritual mind of love. That's what he's saying there. The two become one. And it's beyond gender. There's no gender in heaven. We have bodies like angels. Great. Author. Jesus is explaining that once their inner spiritual body and soul mind of love come fully alive and they manifest it through their temporary body of flesh, then both bodies will be as one. They'll be at one in purpose to bring heaven's love to children. So the physical body and mind has to align perfectly with your spiritual mind of love. If you're the spiritual rider on an earthly horse, you have to hold the reins and make sure your horse only delivers love, only goes in the direction of love. We have to control the physical body as best we can. It's not easy. You can get infections and chemical problems and damage. But if we're healthy body, healthy physical flesh, then it's our spiritual mind that must hold the reins and guide our horse to only be loving and caring. Your horse, your earthly horse, can form a hand that reaches out and helps someone, helps lift them up. I'll lift you up. Here, let me give you a hand. This same hand can grab a gun, pull a trigger and blow the brains out of a child in Gaza or in Russia or Ukraine or wherever they're, West Bank, wherever all these filthy satanic murderers are working in the world. That same hand can commit satanic evil. So our horse is vulnerable. They can only do that, of course, if they're false shadow identities. They're not spiritual children of the loving one. All the people in those wars are not spiritual children anymore. They're beasts of the flesh, I call them. That's all. All flesh dies, rots and stinks. So Jesus is explaining that the two bodies are at one. When one spiritual hand becomes the same as your physical hand, when your spiritual eye becomes the same as your physical eye. You're just going to express love. That's what he's saying in this Thomas saying. Once your two bodies align up and become at one, perfectly at one, it's a bit like the two hands. I use that analogy. There's two hands there, but if they align perfectly, you might think there's only one hand there. Jesus is saying that's how you have to be here on earth. Bring your physical body into alignment with your primary spiritual body, because the body of flesh dies. You're not taking it with you. It doesn't rise from the dead. Forget that rubbish. That's just garbage. Your spiritual body is going to leave. That's the one Jesus said. You've got to protect it with your life, your spiritual life of love. That's how you protect it, by being love. If you don't do that, you're in danger. So Jesus is saying they've got to be the same. Same, one in purpose. I ramble on a bit, don't I? But I love his words. Just as the nursing babies and newborns, so also will the disciples be once they are born again into their spiritual bodies. And the children who awaken spiritually have bodies like angels and no longer have biological genders. Our spiritual identity and image eventually replace our physical identity and image. So eventually we'll have the angelic body only, as Jesus did when he rose from the dead. He only had a spiritual body, and it was perfect. It had no wounds in it or anything like that. That, again, they're cover-up stories. So that's it. We'll move on to the next one. Jesus gives us what we have not yet to realize. We have yet to realize. Thomas 17. Jesus said, I shall give you what no eye has seen, what no ear has heard, what no hand has touched, and what has never arisen in a mortal mind. Author. Jesus is referring to our spiritual body and soul mind of love, which he guides us to find within ourselves once we awaken our spirit to life. We are usually only used to engaging with the material body of temporary flesh, with our physical senses and mortal mind. Jesus is saying, I'm going to help you find this thing which you haven't realized yet. You can't see it, you can't touch it. It's spiritual, you see. That's quite literal. You can't see it, you can't hear it, you can't touch it. That's all physical, material ways of the way we experience life here in the material earth world of dirt. In the spiritual world, it's completely different. We live out of spirit. Our minds are spiritual. Our bodies are spiritual. But Jesus is saying, I'll help you find this. I'll help you experience it. I'll give it to you by helping you find it within yourself. That's what he's always saying. Flesh gives birth to flesh, spirit gives birth to spirit. John 3:38. Jesus said, truly, truly, I say to you, unless one is born again from above, he cannot see the kingdom of the loving spiritual creator. Nicodemus said to him, how can a man be born again when he is old? Can he enter a second time into his mother's womb and be born? Jesus answered, truly I say to you, unless one is born of water and the Spirit, he cannot enter the kingdom of the loving spiritual creator in the heavenly spiritual world. That which is born of the flesh is flesh, and that which is born of the Spirit is spirit. Do not be amazed that I say, you must be born again from above. The wind blows where it wishes, and although you hear the sound of it, you do not know from where it comes and where it is going. So it is with all children who are born of the Spirit. You never see a spirit leave a dead body of flesh, you see, because you're looking at, when someone dies, I've had family die and I've been there when they're dying, and you don't see any spirit leave, you see, because the eyeballs are flesh and blood and bones are material. They only see material things. Only a spiritual child would see a spirit leave. Nicodemus replied, how can these things happen? Jesus answered, are you a teacher of Israel but do not know these things? Most assuredly I say to you, we speak of what we know and testify about what we have seen, but you do not accept or believe our witness. If I have told you about earthly things and you do not believe they are true, how will you believe me if I speak about heavenly spiritual things that you cannot see? In the Thomas Gospel, Jesus said, woe to the flesh that depends on the soul. Woe to the soul that depends on the flesh. Author. Jesus is trying to tell Nicodemus we all have two very different bodies. One is earthly flesh, which we can see with our earthly eyes. One is spiritual, but we cannot see it with our earthly eyes. As Jesus said to Nicodemus, you do not see spiritual children come or go, just as you cannot see the wind. for they are born into spirit from the heavenly spiritual world above. Jesus clearly states flesh only gives birth to flesh. Spirit only gives birth to spirit. We must all be born again into our eternal spiritual body through receiving the loving spiritual life force from our loving Creator above in heaven. This is the living water that gives our spirits true life to awaken our spirits to live out of now while here on earth. The Jews had no idea about this truth of our two bodies of spirit and flesh in one and could not comprehend what Jesus was explaining. We see this clearly when Nicodemus, who was a Jewish teacher, asks if we have to climb back into our mother's physical body and womb to be reborn. Our earthly bodies are formed from the earthly substances of our earthly mother's bodies of flesh and are temporary and eventually all die and disintegrate. Nice song.
Affirmation sounds.
Sorry. Beautiful song. Flower Girl. I'll just move back to the birds chirping. So the Jews had no idea about this truth of our two bodies of spirit and flesh in one and could not comprehend what Jesus was explaining. We see this clearly when Nicodemus, who was a Jewish teacher, asks if we have to climb back into our mother's physical body and womb to be reborn. Our earthly bodies are formed from the earthly substances of our earthly mother's bodies of flesh and are temporary and eventually all die and disintegrate. Our spiritual bodies are formed from the heavenly substances of our spiritual Creator's loving spiritual life force, and they are eternal. Spirit is a different substance. So I say it's a different life force. A lot of children say it's a different energy. Well, that's fine, but I prefer life force though. They are both very different types of bodies and they need different types of nourishment to be alive. Jesus said, "My words, they are spirit and they are life. Man does not live by bread alone." Was another thing he said. Spiritual food and earthly food. Thomas 82, Jesus said, "When you see a likeness of yourself, you are happy. But when you see your image that came into being before you, and that neither die nor become visible, how much disturbance will that cause in you?" This is the only known reference we have where Jesus seems to be stating that we have had many lives before this one, many different bodies and identities, but we think we have only had this present one. To realize we may have had previous lives could be disturbing for some, but it does match the Hindu and Buddhist spiritual teachings, that we travel from life to life until we perfect our spiritual awakening and then enter heaven or nirvana, no longer having to be born again in this material world where everyone will suffer at some time in their life. That saying is an anomaly. It's the only one we have in the Gospel of Thomas. But in general, Jesus is saying you've got two bodies. One travels on from life to life, perhaps. That may be correct. Certainly goes to another life. Absolutely. And we reap as we sow. Absolutely correct. With what you measure out, it will be measured back to you. Spiritual nourishment. John 4:31-34. While still at the well, the disciples returned and were urging him to eat something, but he said to them, "I have nourishment to consume that you are still unaware of." The disciples wondered if someone had already brought him something to eat. Jesus said, "My nourishment comes from performing the spiritual works of my loving spiritual Creator, sustained by her loving spiritual life force within my spiritual body." Author. All spiritual bodies are sustained only by our spiritual Creator's loving life force, which wells up inside us like a fountain of living spiritual water, as Jesus taught. All our spiritual bodies are born from above in the heavenly spiritual world and placed in our bodies of flesh at conception. Once born again into our true spiritual identity of love, we become the spiritual children of our loving spiritual Creator in heaven on earth and can never harm anyone. Our body of flesh is sustained by earthly foods, water, chemicals, minerals and gases to have temporary life and is dualistic in its mind's view. Our spiritual body and mind are singular in their view. As Jesus said, if your eye or mind is single in love, your whole body will be filled with light. But if your eye or mind is dualistic, you will be filled with darkness. Yahweh is a dualistic God of love and murder. That's why Jesus tried to bring them out of it. And Christians must not ever say Yahweh is the God of Jesus, because there are two Yahwehs there. You can't get out of that trap because they've called the two different gods by the same name. So there's no point even talking about Yahweh. Unless you say Yahweh 1's the murdering, thieving war god, like Mars, Ares, Sekhmet of the other religions. And then there's Yahweh 2, the loving God. You could say that if you want, but it's not worth bothering about it. Just stay with Jesus. He's only love. He's connected to the divine source of love, who's only love. Just stay with him. Jesus clearly states that we need our spiritual body and soul mind of love to come alive in order to enter the heavenly spiritual world of our loving spiritual creator, and this is the most important body we have. The dead body of flesh is just food for the vultures. He said so himself. Stop saying it's going to come up from the ground at some stinking apocalypse that you say Jesus is going to cause. So, such slander against my good friend. Unbelievable. Just as we need blood to be circulating through our body of flesh for it to have earthly life, likewise we need our spiritual Creator's loving spiritual life force circulating through our spiritual body to have spiritual life. Does that sound logical, intelligent, sensible, spiritual? Totally. This is the living water Jesus speaks about that we need to receive in order to awaken, activate, empower, and bring our spiritual body and soul mind of love alive now, right now, today, this morning, this evening, this afternoon. Without it, they will remain present but dormant, like a seed waiting to be watered, to sprout, come alive, grow, flower, and bear fruit. We must be born again from heaven above and move into our spirit now while we have the chance. So important. Jesus just went on and over this point repeatedly. You've got another body. Get into it now. Leave behind that dualistic body of loving and hating. And, you were told of old, love your neighbor but hate your enemy. That's dualism, dualistic thinking. Jesus told them, get out of it. You're in trouble. You're worshipping a satanic war god. It's in his words. Gain the material world, but lose your soul. Matthew 16:26, Jesus said, for what does it profit a man of flesh if he gains the whole material world, but injures or destroys his true spiritual body and soul mind of love? Or what earthly material thing can a man exchange for his heavenly spiritual body and soul? They're two different things, different substances. They're not exchangeable. One doesn't become the other either. Matthew 10:28. Do not fear those who can kill your body of flesh, but can do no more to you. But only fear sin, that can destroy your body of flesh and also lead your spiritual body and soul into outer darkness, tormented by being separated from our loving Creator in heaven by your own wrongdoing. That's the thing to fear in this world, sin. All enemies can kill our body, accidents can kill our bodies, diseases can kill our bodies of flesh and bone and blood. But sin, that's the only thing that can damage your spiritual life, and you are the one who chooses to do it. No one can force us to sin, although of course many children are forced into doing evil things by others under great duress. Well, that's not their fault. That's different. But when you're healthy and well and you choose to murder and kill like all these satanic warmongers in the world at the moment, well, regretfully, hell's waiting for them, a hellish experience. John 6:27, do not labour only for earthly foods which perish with your earthly body, but labour for the spiritual nourishment from heaven, the loving spiritual life force, which endures within your spiritual body to eternal life. I will give this to you, for I am an awakened spiritual child of our loving spiritual Creator in the heavenly world, and this is my joy to do so. Jesus will share this awakening with all of us. We'll all become his brothers and sisters now and in heaven. Matthew 19:24, assuredly I say to you that it is hard for those who have material riches to enter the heavenly spiritual world. It is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man in material wealth to enter our loving Creator's spiritual world. Different worlds, different substances, different life forces. You can't take your money and your Mercedes and your Lamborghini there. It's all dirt. Mark 12:17. Give to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to our loving Creator the things that are hers. Or his, if you use the old-fashioned pronoun. Thomas 27. Jesus said, if you do not fast from the material world, you will not find the heavenly spiritual world. If you do not keep the spiritual day as a spiritual day, you will not see our loving spiritual Creator. Again, he's saying, don't get caught up in the material world and live every day out of the Spirit. Make every day a spiritual day. Otherwise, you won't get into heaven. Jesus said in Thomas 67, those who know everything but lack within, lack everything. So you can have all the money in the world and know all the worldly ways and tricks and things to do, but if you're a cold-hearted fish with no love in you, you can own the whole world, but you're actually sort of dead to the Spirit. Thomas 70, Jesus said, if you bring forth what is within you, what you have will save you. That's your spiritual body and soul, mind of love that's in you. If you do not have that within you, what you do not have will be unable to save you. You see, it's the spiritual body and spiritual mind that's in you right now listening to this, if you're still listening to it. That's what's going to lead you to heaven. But you've got to move, you've got to get into it. You've got to move into it. You've got to become one with it. And leave behind the dualistic thinking and dualistic ways or any sinful ways or any evil things you're doing, whatever. Leave all them behind. Let them die. Let all sins die. And just become at one with love. It's a really beautiful thing. If you bring forth what is within you, what you have will save you. Where did he say, when they asked him, where is heaven, Jesus? He said, it's within you. Look for it. Become a spiritual child of heaven now. That's what he's saying. Beautiful. But if you haven't got it, he said, well, you know, how are you going to get into heaven? That's only a spiritual world. Your dirt body just disintegrates. Jesus said, let the one who finds the world and becomes wealthy renounce the world and become spiritual. Thomas 109, Jesus said, the heavens and the earth will roll up in front of you at death, but he who is living on the living spiritual life force of the living one will not see death or fear. If you're living out of the spiritual life force of our loving spiritual Creator from a heavenly spiritual world right now, before your body dies, there's a pretty good chance you're going to make it to heaven. No more suffering for you, no more death. All the beautiful children there are only filled with love because that's the only way you're going to get in. Don't try getting up to the gates there with a gun in your hand or a drone or a tank. Sorry, you've put those locks on the gate yourself. Thomas 110, Jesus said, whoever finds their true spiritual self is worth more than the world. Again, he's saying the spiritual world's way more valuable than this material world. It's another dimension, I can't even imagine how beautiful the spiritual heavenly world is. It's spiritual, no one gets hurt, there's no death, there's no evil, there's nothing like that. It's the whole spiritual world of heavenly world or nirvana is just love. Everything that's created is love. There is no, you don't kill animals and eat their dead bodies. All that happens here in this sort of insane asylum called the earth. Not there. Author. Jesus was always teaching not to place your hope in the material world or your temporary body of flesh. He gave spiritual instructions to help us all become at one with our primary spiritual eternal body, which he knew was vital to be alive and filled with love. If we have it, we will be saved. Then we can enter the heavenly spiritual world after our death experience and not fall into the trap of only being a body of flesh that dies. We may be very successful and full of knowledge about the material world and worldly life, but if we lack spiritual love within our souls and spirits, we lack the most important thing of all and are actually empty. So we must treat every day of our life here on earth as another day to practice being spiritual in all things we do. Bodies like angels in Mark 12, 24, 27 and Luke 20:34-38, Jesus said, "The children of this earthly material world marry and are given in marriage in bodies of flesh. But those who are ready to arise from their dead body of flesh and live in spirit will enter the heavenly spiritual world where marriages is no longer necessary. For they will have spiritual bodies like angels, having become spiritual children of our loving spiritual Creator, and cannot experience death anymore. For our loving spiritual Creator is not a creator of dead bodies of flesh, but of spiritual bodies that are eternal." Author, although we may not be able to see our spiritual bodies with our eyes of the flesh, Jesus tells us they will be like the perfect, beautiful bodies of angels in heaven. They will be our perfect spiritual bodies, not bodies of flesh, as many Jewish Christians wrongly teach. Our loving spiritual Creator is only love. Our body of flesh and body of spirit must become at one with love in order to enter the heavenly spiritual world. So, two bodies. What you do is you try to concentrate on the words of Jesus on how to be more forgiving, more loving, more compassionate. All his instructions are there. That will awaken your spiritual identity. You'll leave behind the judgmental, condemning, or hateful, or even murdering identity, which they're, the warmongers are just murdering. They're just murderers, satanic murderers. They've moved so far away from their spiritual identity and covered it in layer upon layer upon layer upon layer upon layer of murder and death of other children. They don't realize when they die they're going to experience every one of those deaths. They're going to experience it as if it's them being crushed under the concrete building, legs being blown off, head being blown off, whatever it is they're doing to these other children, this stinking, filthy, satanic evil they're doing, that's going to come back on them. They're going to experience that. They don't believe this. They don't believe in heaven. They don't believe in any sort of spiritual creator of love at all. They don't believe in hell. I'm warning them. You've got no idea, and you will deeply, deeply regret not listening to children who warn you. Put down your guns and bombs and drones and tanks and go home and love your family and love your neighbor as yourself and your next door nation as yourself. You disgusting, satanic children. Sorry, but I've got to love you the hard way. You're disgusting. Killing and murdering other children. What a disgusting, evil little child you grew up to be. Once you weren't like that when you were a little child, but you became a false, lying shadow identity. You've moved into the beast of the flesh identity, which has no existence once the body dies, except the fact that you've covered your spiritual body in stinking filth. And that will travel on, and you will be in the presence of the divine loving Creator who created your spiritual life to be a loving child on earth. But instead you became satanic. I don't believe your spirit will be destroyed, but you'll be in a screaming, burning realization of undergoing the hell you created for other children until it's all finished, however long that takes. So we got two bodies. So Jesus said, after that rather dark dialogue, but it's the truth, you see. If we don't tell these satanic warmongers that they're Satan's children now, I mean, all the armaments industry, that's all Satan's main, that's one of his best industries, that one. Gambling's probably another one. So he loves destroying children's lives, or this satanic life force, or this satanic way of thinking, this collective consciousness of satanic thinking, which is, if that's what Satan is, well, it's a collective consciousness of false, lying identities. You know, Putin, Netanyahu, Trump, Hamas, Iran, all these people, Ukraine even, murdering and killing. Their consciousness is kill, murder. That's their consciousness. That's a satanic consciousness. It can't happen if you're in your spiritual identity. You can't do that. It's impossible. That's why Jesus said, don't worry about someone who can kill your body of flesh. Don't worry about it too much. You know, protect yourself, run away, defend yourself, but don't become like them. You've got a spiritual body, he said. That's the one you've got to protect with your life. Your body of flesh is going to die anyway. If you're not filled with love when you leave your body of flesh, and if you're covered in dark murder and filth, you're in big trouble. But if you don't believe this spiritual truth, you see, you'll ignore it. And there's the trap. That's why I'm teaching these things now. These are the true teachings of Jesus, very similar to Buddha's teachings, who was also a pacifist. Jesus was a pacifist till it was destroyed by the corrupt church leaders. So this dialogue about the chapter on the two bodies is extremely important. And the Jewish Christian churches are not teaching it correctly. They're falsifying the dialogue, and they're unfortunately confusing everything, and children are leaving because it doesn't make sense. But this makes perfect sense because they're his words, and they're easily logical, intelligent. You can see it repeated right through his sayings. They all make sense. They all point to the one truth. We've all got two bodies. One is going to, oh, where are we? There we are. We've all got two bodies, and they almost look like one, but at death, you've got two. One falls away to the earth, and this one, hopefully, like a butterfly and the caterpillar. The caterpillar disintegrates, and the butterfly goes to heaven. That's, of course, a universal analogy that many people know of. Two bodies in one. So that's Jesus' teaching, and I teach that because that's the truth. It's the only thing that makes sense. Well, there we go. Two bodies in one. That's chapter 3. We'll move on to chapter 4 after this. Remember, you've got a spiritual body now and a spiritual mind of love. And if you follow his words and teachings and move into it and only become spiritual now, and you'll be okay when the death experience comes to you, and as it comes to all of us, you'll be okay, even though it might be very painful. Often is, I'm afraid. But we have to just pass through that, like passing through a gauntlet of suffering. But as soon as this piece of meat here in the middle of the chest, once that piece of meat, they call it the heart muscle, once that piece of meat stops moving, that's it. The umbilical cord's cut, and the two bodies separate. This physical body can no longer send any messages to your spiritual body and your spiritual mind. You can no longer suffer any agony and pain from the chemistry of the physical body. It's finished. There are no messages sent from the brain anymore, the brain mind. It's dead. So you'll be free of all that, and if you've lived a good life, then you'll be in heaven. Doesn't matter whether you're Christian, Jew, Buddhist, Muslim, atheist, Baha'i faith, you know, it really doesn't matter. A Sikh, I mean, I won't list all the different religions in the world, but it doesn't matter. You're a human child, and if you're living out of love, regardless of religion or no religion, you're the same as me. And if you're a pacifist, well, you're definitely the same as me. If you refuse to join any army or military service, you are the same as me. You are the same as Jesus and Buddha. You're the same. You're a brother or a sister of Jesus and Buddha. You're a child of the loving spiritual creator in the heavenly spiritual world, and you will go there as long as you stand your ground. Bring love into this world before we leave it, and we all leave it. Okay? Bye for now. Next one is chapter 4 on, what's that on? Oh, the children of light. Oh, nice one. Okay.